Thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here today with all of you as fellow travelers on a pilgrimage of learning towards a hopefully more sustainable new normal. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm very passionate about personal and organizational transformation. And during the last 25 years or so, I've worked in nonprofit, in startups, and major global companies. And I've really made it my purpose to create better organizations. And I do feel there's still a lot for us to do. Whilst this so-called fourth industrial revolution is literally taking the world by its ears, our organizations have collectively produced numerous outcomes that nobody really wanted, like burnout and loneliness, inequality and hunger, and ecological collapse. And by some estimates, more than $7 trillion are wasted every single year globally due to employee disengagement. And if that wasn't enough, more than 50% of Fortune 500 companies have disappeared during the last 20 years. But I do believe there's also hope. The winds of change have started blowing forcefully, and this current crisis is bonding us all together, maybe like never before, and is allowing us to collectively pause and reflect. Could we imagine a new normal where we all make a difference to people and planet through our daily work? Could we liberate our organizations to bring forth a more sustainable future? And indeed, could we unite to spark a fifth revolution of virtuous, passionate, and unselfish leadership to make it all happen? I'm extremely pleased to be here with all of you today to embark together on a momentous adventure to give it a try. But rather than detailed slides, I want to share with you a few selective reflections from the many, many notes of my personal diaries that I've written over the years, based on my own experiments and struggles and lessons learned, often facing my own demons and those powerful forces of the old mindset seeking to prevail over those delicate sparks of the new. And I do wish my personal learnings may provide convenient provisions for your own journeys and maybe allow us all to join forces in an attempt to reshape our future. So without further ado, let us weigh our virtual anchors and set forth together towards the mysterious seas of personal and organizational change, and like humble sailors, ride the waves towards 6 ports of reflection along our journey. And these relate to the why, our values, the what, organizations, individuals, and teams, and finally the how, leadership, from purpose to wider impact. But as always, please do bear in mind, this is MVP number 1. And as we typically say in Agile, if you look at your first MVP and you're not sincerely embarrassed, you're doing something wrong. So please be forgiving and add your thoughts to help me make it better at the end. Alas, before we even hoist our sails, we are already at our first port of reflection. As Stephen Covey once suggested, start with the end in mind. And if we embark on a voyage to reshape our world, we should first check our bearings. And I don't know about you, but I very often encounter people who tell me very earnestly that they deeply desire to become agile or teal without ever asking themselves the question why. And that's not very surprising, maybe. We've created a seductively materialistic and individualistic narrative in our Western society where self-interested growth, productivity, and stock prices have become ends in themselves. In a pandemic of busyness, we've often succumbed to that hedonistic treadmill of money for money's sake. When people start to work ever longer hours to attain status and wealth just to find out that it doesn't really make them happier. And as a result, the number 1 source of depression by 2030 is going to be work-related stress. Plus, in creating ever greater riches, arguably for far too few, we've often ignored ecologic externalities just to discover that our mother planet is at the brink of bankruptcy and the collapse of global climate will threaten the livelihoods of millions. So what do we really believe in? What do we really stand for? These questions are both existential and fundamental. We create organizations for a purpose, to achieve something together, which individually we couldn't achieve. And I strongly believe that in the future, personal and organizational success must transcend a quest for money and shareholder value. As Colin Meyer maintained at the World Economic Forum in January this year, the true purpose of organizations is to solve the planet's problems profitably. It's not just about profits and endless growth, but also about an inclusive and sustainable future for all our stakeholders, not just bigger, but better. And not as a question of marketing or charity, but as a matter of morality and justice. Exploitation and inequality are not economic laws, but inherent failures of our economic systems. And I believe the time has come to evolve societal and organizational success measures beyond GDP and PBT. And in a world where traditional communities of churches and neighborhoods have been eroded, and where scientific management has often filled gaps of meanings with the gospel of growth, and where work has become so central in our lives, where organizations are like small states, I believe businesses have to step up. As Immanuel Kant warned us a century ago, human beings must always be treated as an end in themselves, never as means, never as cogs in a machine. And today, I believe we need human-centric organizations more than ever to provide a place of meaning and community where people can grow and flourish. Hence, the North Star on our journey shall be to transform our organizations to create greater value, both co-creating collective purpose for all our stakeholders and co-elevating individual development and meaning for our employees profitably. But let us lay on even keel just a little bit longer to examine what such a reshaped organization of the future could possibly look like. We live in an ever more complex world, facing ever faster changes, advances in technology and data, shortening half-life of knowledge, and ever greater global interdependencies. As they say, today is the slowest day you will ever experience from now on. And some researchers maintain that 65% of the future professions of people entering primary school today do not even yet exist. Hence, in these new 20s, we need to let go of the illusion that work can be predicted or planned in detail. As BCG suggested last year, the companies that will win in the 2020s are those who can compete on learning, from a paradigm of scalable efficiency that has dominated our businesses since the Industrial Revolution. We need to transition to a new world of scalable learning and development, from competitive to adaptive advantage, and from closed systems to boundaryless ecosystems. The simple truth is that our world has become too complex to be controlled through bureaucracy. We cannot stand on a mountain top and preach strategy down the hills to achieve successful execution. Today, I'm convinced that in order to thrive, we need to embrace uncertainty and maximize human flourishing at work rather than just driving efficiency and productivity. And with the increasing frequency of crises like this current pandemic, we also need to push our ability to carefully balance adaptability and resilience. Hence, liberated organizations of the future, I believe, must harness ideas from everywhere and create an environment where people can and want to make a difference, tearing down those ivory towers and replacing our traditional hierarchies with ever and increasingly more fluid and modular structures, moving from centralized and extractive to regenerative and distributive designs. And it is indeed curious how quickly in most transformations I've seen, people have rushed to design sophisticated organizational charts, dividing up the turf, or sometimes just moving those proverbial deck chairs on the Titanic. I'm fully convinced that going forward, we must revise our paradigms. Instead of optimizing organizations as deterministic machines, analytically dividing information and power and specializing, we need to start acknowledging organizations as complex developmental systems, as living organisms with minds and hearts and souls. And where wonder and love have their place as much as science and efficiency, where deep emotional bonds of community and trust prevail, and where individuals and teams experience and develop together. Not only learning within the structure, but also continuously adapting that structure itself, where influence and authority is different from rank and position, and where employees have freedom to experiment, where many, many more people become their own CEOs. Yet at the end of the day, more than structures or methodologies a tool, I believe the difference lies in core principles. In humanocracies, the business of business is people. We cannot resolve the future of work with utilitarian thinking, just as we cannot understand quantum physics with Newtonian principles. And now we are plain sailing in open waters, on the lookout for our first true island of reflection, which is, of course, our people. So how can we unleash the creativity of our people? How can we turn office workers into self-actualizing innovation privateers? For decades, we have been trained to see humans as strictly rational consumers in economic markets. And in our businesses, we have treated people like easily replaceable human capital or exchangeable human resources to be controlled. And as a result, more than 75% of employees feel disengaged. So I'm absolutely convinced that going forward, we truly must put people first. And that means we must relearn to cherish their uniqueness and design our organizations to fulfill basic human needs, the sense of orientation and purpose, belonging, autonomy, self-esteem. True success can only be when every human being at work has the ability to develop, use their creativity, and have impact, when agency becomes activism. But this won't be automatic. In a world where we are required to wear many different masks, where our public identity has become quite disengaged from our inner life, it has become challenging just to be with ourselves and with each other, resulting in dualisms and tensions. And I believe that everything we call mental health is fundamentally related to interpersonal processes. As someone suggested, all problems are relationship problems. Therefore, in deliberately developmental organizations, we must help individuals to recognize their own biases and needs, anxieties, attachment styles, defense and coping mechanisms, in order to attain that self-esteem and agency, and to grow their ability to work with and care for others, and to co-generate meaning and value in service of the community. Our inner game is our outer game, or as Lalou once said, we can only go far into the we if we fully inhabit the I. Then by matching desires and competencies of individuals with meaningful activities, we can enable flow, personal development, and ultimately happiness at work. When people are happier, they don't just act smarter, they are smarter. Yet happiness, as Aristotle suggested, is not about pleasure or wealth, income, how many followers we have on Twitter, or always getting all we can, but a matter of growing our character in a lifetime of personal development, the cultivation of those virtues that make us good human beings. But happier individuals clearly won't be enough. Organizational learning is a team sport. So how can we channel the creativity of individuals into collective organizational learning and evolution at scale? Now let me ask you, do you feel you can truly bring your ideas to the front rows of your organization? If not, you're not alone. Only 20% of people feel their opinion counts, and 70% report that new ideas are met with hostility. And that's no surprise, is it? Imagination often requires us to operate outside the rules of the game, which is a deeply political act. Blimey, here we're truly in the doldrums. And in my experience, if we want to enable self-organization and organizational learning at scale, we need to adapt the context for our teams at multiple levels in terms of structure, management processes, and team dynamics. But above all, I believe we need to pay very careful attention to distribution of information, knowledge, and power. Existing systems often distort or suppress information. And in the future, I'm convinced radical transparency should prevail. As they say at VC, everything is public unless it is harmful. So strategy becomes a firm-wide conversation. And in terms of power, central authority does not lend itself to decentralized experimentation and learning. Self-generative complex systems need boundaries, but will be stifled if positional power is imposed. At ING, we were one of the first banks to roll out Agile at scale, globally and beyond IT across most functions. And as I think we've demonstrated, Agile can provide more flexibility within the pyramid, enabling self-organization and cross-functional flows of information and decision-making. But I've also seen many Agile implementations really struggle because they never dealt with existing power or ownership structures. And following on from Agile, I believe we will see more ambidextrous organizations that can enable the exploitation of the existing and the exploration of the new. But it won't stop there. We are already witnessing experiments with meshed and adaptive networks of teams, market-oriented ecosystems like in Hire, and interconnected circles in holacracy and sociocracy. Zhang Min, the CEO of the Chinese white good manufacturer Hire, claimed that the future will hold only two types of organizations: online platforms and those that rely on them. But at the same time, our organizations will become boundaryless. We are masters as competition, yet we still lack a global infrastructure for collaboration and innovation. However many smart people we can organize inside a company, there will be many more smart people who can connect and add value outside. And in terms of management processes, organizational learning requires both order and freedom. And contrary to what some people may think, Agile does not mean chaos. It always balances autonomy and alignment. We earn autonomy by aligning ourselves with the wider system. And control is only relinquished in line with the growing ability in a team to embrace ownership. Talbeck speaks here of liberating structures like principles and roles, routines, rituals, methodologies to enable and host that generative dialogue, involving as many people as possible in supporting both single and double loop learning. And here technology can become a powerful enabler to support co-creation at ever greater scale. But as we often note in transformation, and much to the disappointment of my friends in IT, the golden recipe is almost always 70-20-10. 70% people, 20% process, 10% systems. Our challenges might be caused by technologies, but they're seldom resolved by it. And organizational learning also entails mechanisms to manage tensions. The creative destruction of innovation always generates conflicts: individual versus team, department versus organization, business versus society, short-term versus long-term, etc. And by its very nature, total consensus would overwhelm complex systems. And we need procedures to attain not consensus, but consent. Finally, I'm convinced that dialogic and generative organizational design will become imperative. Many organizational issues are caused by suboptimal design, and we cannot understand a system unless we try to change it. This also requires adaptation of sometimes anachronistic HR and finance practices. Here, focus must move from individual high performer towards group dynamics. Compensation needs to correlate with team impact on collective purpose. And performance management must facilitate self-reflection and peer coaching. And I do hope, and I envisage that over time, our entire organization will become a laboratory of ideas, integrating action and inquiry into everything we do, to always keep sensing and exploring and experimenting whilst we're moving in teams and peer communities of learning. Sounds like a plan? Full sail ahead, explorers and leaders of the futures. There's land in sight. Alas, this story wouldn't be very exciting if it was straightforward to reach our destination. And in fact, with increasing complexity and urgency, I've experienced that leadership itself has become a lot more difficult. Business schools have for decades been training generations of managers and leaders in that seductive and simplistic logic of principal-agent theory, where a leadership elite which has the power instructs the masses of reluctant workers with little power on what to do, deploying sticks and carrots as necessary to adjust their behaviors. Unfortunately, to move forward, leadership has to radically change. In a world of self-organization, there is no place anymore for patriarchal commanders-in-chief, be that men or women, who narcissistically rule by positional power and dominance. Agile leaders set destination, not direction. They focus on the why, not the how. And decisions here are always made at the lowest possible level, close to the customer. So rather than telling people what to do, leaders today need to become experts in building, sensing, caring for, and influencing organizational systems, in coaching individuals and teams, and in enabling that co-creation and emergence of shared purpose. In a developmental organization, the quality of relationships, of connections, must have the same importance as the quality of outcomes. And in such a new world, we need chief communicators who earn the respect of their people by making personal sacrifices to serve the collective good. And we need chief connectors who can create a cultural force field of energy, fostering psychological safety and trust, reinforcing transparency and embracing failure, and displaying gratitude, compassion, and kindness. As John Quincy Adams once said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you're a leader. But probably the truest measure of successful leadership is quite simply, as Ben Zander once said, shining eyes. And in this context, it's quite curious that in transformation programs, we very often spend substantial energy on business cases and milestones, KPIs, Gantt charts, etc. Yet in my experience, the most vital success factors are almost all the time deeply emotional. There's anxiety in every human system below the surface, even here on this call. And it cannot be fully understood just by our minds. It also needs comprehension by our hearts. And I strongly believe that if leaders are unable to sense and integrate and nudge this underlying anxiety towards the purpose, it's going to surface in many other ways that are not conducive to the system's success. Leaders are a bit like acupuncturists, placing their needles to facilitate the energy flows in an organizational body. But such a new transpersonal leadership paradigm is more than just EQ. It integrates intellectual, emotional, and spiritual intelligence. It integrates the male and the female, the cognitive and the emotional, the will and wonder. And future leaders lead beyond the ego, as John Knight writes. They truly understand with heart and mind and soul how everything hangs together in a web of life, including their own self. Allowing time for awareness and reflection rather than jumping into action. Letting go to become vulnerable imperfectionists and hearing their soul knocking at the ego's door. Bill Tobert calls these leaders alchemists, leaders who can access that magical mutual power of transformation and provide that maternal holding space to develop people to have self-mastery and meaning and to host that liminal conversation at the edge of what is not yet gone to presence what is not yet there. And here I believe this is unfortunately when most of our ships are dead in the water. The maturity of an organization can never transcend the maturity of its leadership. Leaders create culture with every move they make, with everything they say. And if greater consciousness doesn't operate, a system does not possess this ability to let go of the past and transition to a new model without losing its sense of identity and cohesion. Hence, leadership is our forgotten SDG number 18 and our most important port of call on this journey. And as you can imagine, for traditional leaders who have risen the corporate chain by being in control, this is a difficult challenge. What brought us here won't bring us there. If our definition of success is going up that ladder from VP to SVP to EVP, hierarchy prevails. If we dominate others to uphold our own ego, people around us won't flourish. And if we seek to control an uncertain environment with ever more rigidity, self-organization will perish. And finally, if we try to shrink the complexity of the world to our own cognitive limits, we will fail. But how can we transcend? What is that breakthrough? And I don't know if it's true for you, but when I began, I often found it much easier to make a fist inside myself than to open my hand and heart and allow myself to let go. And I still don't have all the answers, but in my experience, progression here requires vertical development in co-elevating teams of peers, facing our own shadows and our own emotions, letting go of restrictive mental models rather than just intellect or leadership trainings. Responsible leaders, said Manfred Kitz de Vries, are not only born, but twice born through painful individuation, where every victory of the self feels a bit like a defeat for the ego, until we can compassionately see all those facets of an interconnected whole. But above all, I believe it is about tapping into what really matters to us. If you close your eyes and listen hard enough and for long enough, I think you will understand what truly drives you, what life asks from you. Exploding with passion without shame, sensing that wonder of nature, serving others beyond the confines of ourselves. And somehow, the meaning of life is strangely derivative. It materializes only when we totally forget about ourselves and become absorbed in something beyond ourselves. And connecting to that essence of who we are and what we stand for, our moral agency, I think allows us to let go of fear and the desire to control, and to love ourselves and love others for mutual growth. And once we fully commit to serve a greater purpose, to serve all life, magically, synchronously, the world outside us changes too. And suddenly, leadership is not a tribe of special individuals with special traits and not even a role, but about developing the leadership potential in everyone, about people no longer being victims of circumstances, but participating in the creation of new possibilities, about learning together how to shape a more responsible future. And ultimately, leadership is an interrelational, ecocentric capability, a positive movement, what we collectively are able to create, and not by top-down transformation or big bang organizational restructuring, but evolutionary through networks of teams and continual co-creation everywhere. And I know what you think now. That's utopia. Yet Oscar Wilde once wrote, "A map of the world that does not include utopia is not worth even glancing at, for it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing." And I think the truth is that we all have the power to reshape our relationships and organizations from who we are and how we show up. Wherever we live in an organization, we can act within the boundaries of our own permissions to spark energy through our relations. We can go sideways and connect our network to create experiments. If we show vulnerability and courage and compassion and selflessly address challenges that are bigger than ourselves, I believe people will follow. And if we truly care for serving others, we all can craft movements of change. And if we collectively believe in the power of a new model and are willing to become part of its evolution, for us, it will arise. Yet I've learned over the course of my career that transformation is always extremely personal. It was never easy for me to let go. Yet through my strenuous journey, my relationships have become richer. I'm more at ease with myself. I've accepted fear and I've grown. But I also had to learn that true purpose is not only beautiful poetry, but also what we are personally willing to give up or to struggle and to suffer for. It's about how much we dare to hope and how far we decide to push ourselves beyond our comfort zone. As St. Augustine once said, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are and the courage to see that they do not remain the way they are. And if you're already courageous but still feel comfortable, make another step. You cannot think yourself into a new way of acting. You must act yourself into a new way of thinking. And this, fellow travelers, truly completes our short travels together. Personally, I was already convinced before this crisis that we had arrived at an existential moment and it was urgent to act. But with this current pandemic, I do believe the urgency is even greater. This virus lays bare the frailty of our social contract, and the economic lockdowns shine a glaring light on existing inequalities and even create new ones. So I think today is a time where we have to occupy the front rows of our lives and make choices. As leaders, we don't have the privilege to remain silent. And in summary, I believe that through our own transformations, we can gradually spark the liberation of our organizations, crafting those structures and processes and cultures needed to attain an environment for both individual development and the evolution of an emergent collective purpose. And together, our collective works can give rise to a new unifying cultural narrative, a new social big dream that will overcome the limitations of the social materialism that we have today, where success is not only about money, but compassion, community, and character. Why should it work now? I hear you ask if it has never worked before. Because I believe that for the first time in a generation, we are here and willing to look at ourselves in the mirror and see how we are all intrinsic part of a living eco-civilization that needs change, and to start with ourselves first. So let us together show the spirit of pioneers and adventurers and stride forward on this quest to reimagine ourselves and reshape our organizations. Let us spark that fifth revolution to reverberate from heart to heart across the planet, to reconnect humanity and recover better, recover stronger, and recover together. And finally, let me say a big, big thank you to all of those who have guided and accompanied me on my journey to date, and of course to Manuele and the whole team for organizing this wonderful digital get-together. And of course, a big thank you also to all of you, fellow participants. I'm looking forward to further discussions, and I truly hope I've inspired some of you to pack your virtual sea bags and join us on this important adventure. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? Good luck and be safe.